Welcome to day 125 on the trail. We have four readings for today from John chapter 9, verses 1 through 34, Numbers 33, verses 50 through 56, the 106th Psalm, and 1 Maccabees chapter 5, verses 1 through 23. We continue our exploration of John's Gospel in chapter 9 and the story of a man who had been blind from birth. Beginning in verse 1. As Jesus walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Now, one thing here is easy to miss. How did the disciples know who Jesus was looking at? Unless, of course, Jesus was heading toward the blind man or acknowledged him somehow. Either way, the disciples react to the fact that Jesus is interested in this nameless blind man. So Jesus initiates this encounter. Second, the disciples ask a strange question. Who sinned? They are assuming that this blind man, probably begging on the side of the road, had done something wrong, or his parents had done something wrong. However, I think there is a better question in this moment. They could have asked, "How can we help?" That's a much better question. Or, "Jesus, can you cure him?" Plus, if the blind man heard their question, how do you think he felt? "Hey, Jesus, this guy sitting over there, who sinned?" Because obviously he did something wrong. Interestingly enough, Jesus actually answers their question, vindicating both the blind man and his parents. In verse 3, Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him." Look at the second half of Jesus' response again. So that God's works might be revealed. There is a profound question here. Will God really cause someone to suffer for his glory or to reveal himself? Apparently, as hard as it might be to hear, the short answer is yes. But there is one more, very important question that is central to this story. How is God's work going to be revealed in this blind man? How is this man going to play a role in revealing God to the world? Well, then again, we are reading about it today, almost 2,000 years later. Then Jesus does something a little strange. He could have healed the blind man by just saying a word, "Be healed," and the man would have been able to see. Instead, Jesus spits on the ground, makes some mud, and spreads it on the man's eyes. After applying the mud, Jesus sends the man to go and wash in a nearby pool. When he comes back into town, his sight is restored. Now, I don't think this is how God is revealing himself or his glory, because this is just the very beginning of the story. Something else is going to reveal God's glory and purpose. Now, the people in the town notice that he is healed and start asking questions. They ask, "Is this the guy who used to sit and beg?" Some say yes, and others no. It just looks like him. This tells you that the people really did not pay much attention to him. After all, who really pays attention to a blind beggar? So then he tells them, "I am telling you, it is me." So they ask, "Well, how did you get your sight?" He answered, "The man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' And then I went and washed and received my sight." They said to him, "Where is he?" He said, "I do not know." So what does this man do? How does he reveal God? He simply tells his story. Just his personal story of his encounter with Jesus. So again, the crowd asks him, "Where is he?" Notice that so far in this story, no one is excited for him. No one is praising God or thanking God for what has happened. Instead, they decide to take him to the Pharisees. Now, we don't know why, but for whatever reason, we do know that it has nothing to do with the man who was formerly blind. So take a look at what happens next. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. Now it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also began to ask him how he had received his sight. He said to them, "He put mud on my eyes, then I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not observe the Sabbath." But others said, "How can a man who is a sinner perform such signs?" And they were divided. So they said again to the blind man, "What do you say about him? It was your eyes he opened." He said, "He is a prophet." So what do the religious leaders do? Well, what everyone else has done to this man. They ignore him. They ignore the miracle and the encounter with Jesus and focus on religious policy and politics. They ignore the fact that this guy can see and focus on how Jesus made mud, which breaks their interpretation of the Sabbath laws. And I think Jesus knew this. I believe there's a reason Jesus made the mud, which was considered working on the Sabbath, and sent him to wash. I think Jesus knew how the Pharisees would respond to him. They were so invested in maintaining their power and authority that they felt the need to twist the evidence of what God was doing. And quite ironically, the man who was blind can now see, but the Pharisees have blinded themselves. Therefore, rather than see the miracle standing right in front of them, the Pharisees set out to discredit the miracle. One way to do this would be to prove that the man was never blind in the first place. If he was never blind, then he could have never been healed. So they call in the man's parents. Beginning in verse 18. "Is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" His parents answered, "We know that this is our son, and that he was born blind. But we do not know how it is that he now sees, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him. He is of age. He will speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews. For the Jews had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah will be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, "He is of age. Ask him." So what did his parents do? Did they celebrate the fact that their son, who was born blind at birth, can now see? Do they thank God for this obvious, tremendous miracle? Do they go looking to thank Jesus? Not at all. Instead, they throw their formerly blind son under the bus. The parents were worried about being excluded. They appear to be so worried about being excluded themselves that they in turn exclude their own son. So now let's look back at how this story is going from this man's perspective. This blind man was just healed by Jesus. His parents threw him under the bus. The people in town do not seem to care about him. The religious leaders are suddenly grilling him. And then Jesus disappears. So I wonder if he is asking, what is God trying to reveal in me, and how? So what is this man's response going to be? How is he going to see what Jesus is doing here? Well, the story is not over. The Pharisees once again call the formerly blind man. They tell the man, "Look, we know that this Jesus is a sinner. He broke the Sabbath laws. So there's no way that he healed you. So admit it. He did not really heal you, did he?" Turning to verse 25. He answered, "I do not know whether he is a sinner. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see. They said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" Now, to be honest, this sounds a little like playing poke the bear. Do you want to become his disciples? But it is a great, honest question because he is getting to the heart of their question. Do they want to know the truth? Or are they looking for excuses to ignore Jesus and him? Do they just want to keep the status quo, their way of seeing the world confirmed, of keeping their authority? Or do they want to be open to a relationship with God that gets personal? This man shows the courage to stand with Jesus, even when everyone, his neighbors, leaders, and even his own family, seem to have turned against him. This is not just a story of a man being healed, but a man who shows us what courage and faith looks like. And I believe that is what God is revealing. And the Pharisees' response? Well, you probably expected this. Beginning in verse 28. Then they reviled him, saying, "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from." The man answered, "Here is an astonishing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he does listen to one who worships him and obeys his will. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered him, "You were born entirely in sins, and you are trying to teach us?" And they drove him out. They reviled him, and they kicked him out, probably violently. And for what? What did he do that got him kicked out? Well, he told the truth. He just told the story of his encounter with Jesus. He asked honest, pointed questions, and there's nothing wrong with that either. A blind man shined light into the shadows. What they did with that light was on them, not him. There is a powerful lesson for us here as well. Sometimes, when we tell the truth, it does not mean that we will always be rewarded or accepted. Sometimes we will be resisted, ridiculed, isolated, or worse. But like this man whom Jesus healed, we can show courage and tell our story. We can faithfully stand for what we know to be true, to reveal to those around us what God has done in our lives. Thank you for joining us today. Until next time, stay on the trail.